joyful hello to all of you. My name is Minnku Buttar, founder of the Circle of Joy that brings you self-mastery programs and retreats. It gives me great joy to bring to you this season's talk show, a series of interviews on choosing joy, secrets, and stories from all over the world. It is my diligent attempt to show you that joy is not a hockey-pocky, frivolous concept, but a discipline, a way of life much needed if you want to be resilient, radiant, and unstoppable like a runaway train. So subscribe to my channel so that you can tap into the wisdom of people from all over the world. I will see you there.
Now, many of us put up with bad jobs, bad bosses, and really, really bad days at work. And we hope that career success will lead to happiness. But what if being unhappy and miserable in our jobs is actually making us less productive and ultimately less successful? Well, that's really what comes to my mind. Have we put joy in mental health in our back burners? Dear friends, as we know, the whole universe is in such ecstatic motion. We are changing every millisecond. Workplaces are also evolving. Organizations are struggling to keep and find talent, and leaders know that they have to plan for so much unknown that's happening in the future. A joyful namaste. My name is Minnku Buttar, your host from India, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to the 17th episode of Choosing Joy, Secrets and Stories from Around the World. And where can you catch this wisdom of all my speakers? It's on my YouTube channel on the 1st and 15th. This month will be on the 5th. It's an exception due to exceptional circumstances. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press that cute little bell icon to receive regular notifications. So the conversation I want to have today is what mindful leadership strategies can leaders adopt so that they can help their employees for extended periods of concentration, away from distractions, and still come out shining with the best possible decisions. Now, my guest speaker today for this amazing, amazing conversation, the need of the day, he got his first degree from the University of Buckingham, where he studied about sustainable management and exploitation of living resources. He's the director, lead practitioner, and course designer for Mindfulness Connected. He freelances as a senior consultant in Seven Futures. He's the strategic partner for Talek & Co. Wow. This is a conversation that you need to hang on to. My beautiful global audience, please join me to welcome Mark Leopard all the way from Scotland. Welcome, Mark.
Hello, Minnku. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Mark. We've just about gotten to know each other, but what I have learned of you, you are doing some amazing, amazing work. And, you know, these buzzworthy subjects like meditation and mindfulness, which was centered to personal life, have actually now being introduced in business environments. And this is what we talked about the last time we connected. So let's just get right into this, Mark. And so my first question to you is, why is mindfulness even important in the workplace? And you know, what do you think 2022 is going to bring for the workplace cultures? So please, all yours.
Well, I think there's been an increasing need to bring the human, what makes human life you know, all of the qualities of humanness that are the best qualities of being a human being, to work on that in organizations and the workplace because of sort of increasing rates of change that have taken place that have really not supported kind of the emotional and social needs of people. They've focused more on, you know, metrics of various kinds without actually thinking about how we work as human social beings and what it is that really gives us a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So if you like, over the last 10, 20 years, really it's exploded in the last 10 years. People have started to apply this thing called mindfulness or mindfulness practice in various forms that's really come out of the development of new developments in therapy to help with increasing rates of stress-related mental health problems, which are kind of exploding in society because of the kind of changes and the way we're expected to behave and what we're expected to do and what we think we need to do in order to achieve things and be successful, which has resulted in the kind of breakdown of community, breakdown of sort of the kind of things that hold communities together, traditional religions in traditional communities,
Right.
and the mobility of the workforce, which has also broken up supportive family networks. So we're trying to find ways of reconnecting with people around us in very different social conditions than we've kind of experienced over most of history. So that's why there's a need, if you like.
Yeah, and I think bang on, absolutely. I love how you've put all that together as a very pertinent what we observe. And I think mindfulness has loftier goals, doesn't it, Mark? I mean, it allows people to fully appreciate their surroundings. I feel, there is this movement when you bring it into a workplace culture where I think people can then apply mindfulness to be aware and move to shared goals, perhaps, versus individual goals.
Well, I think that the kind of the way in which people have understood it has been really about individual well-being primarily.
Right.
And starting with really focusing on the clinical applications in mental health problems, and then an explosion of popular interest in apps and just general interest in the idea of mindfulness and what it can do for people to improve their sense of well-being in all sorts of areas of their lives, not just coping with stress, but how it can enrich their lives. So that's been an individual thing primarily. And I guess over the last, a few people, including the work that I've been doing, have been trying to think about, how do we use these learnings or what the development that individual mindfulness practice can do to help us work together in better ways to understand each other and produce a culture, more of a human workplace culture that sustains the best qualities of humans, of our minds and our emotional lives, because we need those things to, as you say, perform more effectively. I mean, I think in the end, it's about shifting the emphasis from outputs, if you like, performance outputs, to realizing that the long-term sustainability of any organization is going to be based on not just the well-being of staff, but the way in which the culture creates an environment that people supports them emotionally and socially, as well as in terms of their aspirations in developing their own careers.
Mark, the word that's coming up for me right now as you were speaking is resilience. And I think to reach a sustainable society, people have to be resilient, they have to be aware, they have to be mentally agile. So you're working with a lot of organizations, and I'll go back to that, and I want to talk a little bit more about this wonderful, message that you're getting across and clinical adaptability for organizations. But right now, tell me, Mark, how do you think companies can really build a resilient culture in such hard times? What kind of a shift do you think they need to do?
Well, like most things, we've got to recognize how things are. We've got to see what's going on to start thinking about how to do something about it. So the first step, and is a growing awareness of the need to create working environments where people feel that they are connected to the sense of purpose with their colleagues, and they're working together and they're building good relationships. So we've got to first realize the need to do that. And then I think culture change itself, I mean, that's the start of culture change. But culture change itself takes many, many years. So it's not something we can do overnight.
Absolutely.
And it starts with thinking about it, putting time and effort into it. And that's very difficult, particularly where if a company or an organization is feeling under immediate stress and is trying to manage immediate pressures to build its business in order to survive. The financial needs do drive that, but at some point that becomes unsustainable because it's not satisfying the sort of meaning, the purpose, the sense of value that individuals have in what they're doing, and a sense of identity that they have with the company and the community that represents their lives as working in that company. So it starts with a conversation, and it starts with realizing a need, and then starting to build all sorts of messages and interventions or strategies to try and improve. It could be, for example, the balance between female employees and male employees, a recognition that they need to increase the number of women in an organization to build an organization that represents society more widely, and to realize the advantages that can come from a diversity of perspectives. In this case, as an example, the different perspectives that women can bring in an organization to the established perspectives that have come out of traditionally structures that have been built by men for a workplace for men in a traditional or a society that has been evolving over the last few well, maybe centuries. It could be more recently to commercial type demands. So lots of little measures start talking about it. Then, for example, people will, the normal approach is to bring in sort of technical solutions that give incentives to make sure that, or first of all, implementing equal opportunities, and then really stressing the importance of how they need to be implemented. And people need to start thinking about what their biases are, their subconscious biases, how that affects the way they select candidates, how that selects the way they kind of treat individuals, or and begin to learn about how they need to be more open to different views, be curious about different views, listen to people, share ideas, and not try and, so it's a much slower process that takes time, realizing that it's not to build confidence and a sense of trust in a culture does take time. And so you start with those measures, but then as things move forward, there are lots of positive things that come out of these kind of interventions, like, for example, specifically, I've mentioned equal opportunities, and then being aware of the kind of biases that we tend to have, expecting how, looking, for example, the way there's been quite a lot of reporting recently about people from non-white British backgrounds applying for jobs and having, for example, Asian names, and how they don't get selected. So we need to start talking about it, and then people begin to be conscious of the fact that there's a subconscious bias against in the UK, for example, for a candidate that comes with an Asian name, or a female candidate.
Worldwide.
And this is just human nature. So we've got to understand this and begin to be conscious about about the kind of biases we have, and then do something about it. And at that level, it becomes very, very challenging, because it's the very reason that we can't, some of us have explicitly bigoted or discriminatory ideas.
Yeah.
To start with, we have to challenge those, but then we have to see what are the kind of the deeper assumptions that we have that are cultural about our identity, and we're blind to those. So it's very challenging. It's a long process of reminding ourselves or making sure that those things we pay attention to those in the workplace. But when we get deeper, then how do we create the conditions in which we feel safe enough to really look at our sort of automatic, socially biased behavior? And that's where we need to start applying, I believe, mindfulness meditation practice to start to really see our own what drives our behaviors, and just those subtle triggers that we're not normally aware of. And I'm then arguing that creating the environment of social safety with support from mindfulness meditation and group activities that enable us to start to see our the way we imagine ourselves to be, the way we imagine others to be, and the kind of emotional sort of forces that drive that begin to enable us to actually consciously work with that.
That is amazing. Yes, Mark, it's so true that it's in those pauses, right? The pauses in between one thought that you could actually, just sit back and evaluate what you're thinking. It's all in that awareness of that moment and staying in the present. So that's beautiful. And really, that was going to lead to my next question. But I think you kind of answered that beautifully. So if there was this one message you wanted to give the senior leaders, I mean, you've wrapped it up pretty beautifully, but these leaders, obviously it's the tone at the top, as we call, they are the ones who show values in action. They are the ones who communicate the culture and the history and the values of the institution and the organization. So if there's one message that you would like to give them, a short one, what would that be from you, Mark, to the senior leaders?
Well, it's true that the senior leaders in the end are may have more influence or more power to affect change, but anyone can be a leader in an organization. And the leader, and it's shifting, this is about shifting the emphasis from the idea of a leader that is one that has a position of authority to tell people what to do, to understand that the most important function of a leader, particularly in today's organizations that are dealing with complex information related problems, that technical skill and adaptation and innovation are something that come from all levels in an organization, and that means that we need to start listening to feedback, insights or contributions, and respect those contributions and encourage them from individuals in the organization that may not have positions of authority and power. So so that it's recognized that the most important thing is actually including the diverse views that come from staff to improve a process that enables a process of continuous improvement and adaptation when we are facing such changing conditions and the need to adapt. There needs to be ideas from different the way different people see things in different ways and what they notice. So there's got to be that, and that can only arise out of really feeling that individuals in the organization feeling that they trust that what they say will be listened to, and that's built out of a culture of social safety.
And that's also, Mark, leads to collective values, and like you said beautifully, communicating effectively. So I had promised earlier on to our audience, I really want to, before we go on to the lighter mood and the rapid fire, You are doing such amazing mindful clinical applications. You have some initiatives for organizations that work towards culture changes. Tell us a little bit more about that. I would love for our audience to know more about what you're doing.
Okay, well, I suppose, over the last 10, 15 years, 20 years, but it's mainly over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a massive growth in awareness and understanding or use, people beginning to develop mindfulness meditation practices that have started with, interests that have come out of clinical applications, first of all, with recurrent depression.
Right.
And the idea that mindfulness is therapy or self-help, or has become deeply, well embedded in contemporary society and the workplace over the last 10 years, really. But shifting the approach, or shifting the approach from a clinical approach to and a self-help approach to one that is more about how do we create sustainable culture in an organization is quite a big leap. And so what I've done is really played a key role in making that shift from individual mindfulness to what I've described as social mindfulness. I had a wonderful opportunity to develop a new program for the staff in a National Health Service hospital about 6 years ago. And so I'd learned lots of things teaching more sort of stress-related mindfulness programs based on the clinical approach, but adapted for a workplace. And it was the learnings that I had in that experience. It was mainly teaching veterinary surgeons and staff from veterinary companies, and learning to adapt the teaching method to the workplace. I learned a number of things. The most important thing that I learned was that a big part of the learning that takes place in the classroom that's related to mindfulness is actually a social process of social learning, listening to other people learning, following activities that actually they're not just about warm-ups, they're actually about beginning to apply awareness to the way in which we experience ourselves and others in activities as a kind of social experiment, to see how we're responding and what we're thinking and how this affects our emotions and moods. And combined with, so those are the social learning aspect I felt was very important. And then combined with actually a better, more accessible way of explaining the kind of, I suppose, a social, biological, psychological way of understanding the way the mind works. So the theory, so combining it into really an interesting, enjoyable training program where people are beginning to see how their own minds, how they're beginning to be able to regulate their own emotions, understand their own thoughts a little better in relationship to others, creates the foundation for them to build a greater sense of social safety within the group, within the team. So that's how that was how it evolved. But the point is, that was a study done. We got that published in a peer-reviewed journal, so that made a big step. And then last year it was formally recognized by the British standards body, the British Association of Mindfulness-Based Approaches, and the Dutch Mindfulness Teachers Association, that are primarily come from the clinical background. They formally recognized a new approach based on the course that I produced, and that was the first course that they recognized. So they're beginning to understand that they're recognizing now that short mindfulness meditations with other sort of social learning and educational elements can have beneficial outcomes formally, whereas before they'd always argued that you had to do an 8-week mindfulness
Yes.
course. The classes had to be 2 hours long. You had to do half an hour or 45 minutes
Yeah.
meditation every day to have a benefit. So
And
they recognize a different model that can work, that recognizes
incredible.
that is adapted for the social needs of a group.
You know, I am smiling, Mark. That sounds so amazing. It sounds, you know, that safety net that you were talking about. It sounds like, you know, someone has your back. And I love the idea of these 10 minutes or 5 minutes, powerful, very focused. I call this focused, you know, focusing on the present, the non-judgmental part of mindfulness, but it's actually losing focus, isn't it? It's just letting be, just be. And that's the beauty, that shift that you keep talking about, that actually, if you are focused and you're self-aware, you don't need this elaborate time that no one has. And that, I think, was a deterrent, wasn't it, forever? Who's going to have 8 weeks and who has 4 weeks? So I'm so happy, and huge congratulations, Mark, for what you're doing and the value that you bring to the society and the organizations. Now, if the whole idea of, you know, doing these conversations on our talk show is also to create a fraternity, where might someone who's interested in knowing more reach you? What's the best way to reach you, Mark?
Well, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so there's a profile on LinkedIn.
Right.
And I've also got a website that is called mindfulnessconnected.com. So people can always they're welcome to contact me or through the website, or obviously send me a connection request on LinkedIn. So those are the best ways of contacting me.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mark, for that amazing value. And that I can imagine this is, you know, probably been years and years and years of research that you put together for the benefit of collective values and universal upliftment. Thank you so much for being you, Mark. And so now let's get into a lighter mood, shall we? We do a rapid fire round, light, quirky, spontaneous answers. If you're ready, should we go?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's have some fun after all that intense focus on the present. I'm going to take you to the future in my first question. What does a healthy planet look like in your inner scene, Mark?
Well, really, we have to be starting to think about how do we, you know, what does sustainability mean? And it necessarily means that we have some kind of sense that everybody's needs are being met in society, and to create a society where people feel that they are justly treated, and that they feel they identify with the whole culture, the greater good of that culture. And that has to be a culture that is actually able to understand and build bridges with other cultures, because in the end, sustainability, we've got to the point where sustainability means survival of the biosphere of the whole planet. We can't divide it up. So we have to be able to build trust with people, not just in our own communities, our own nations, but between nations, to be able to come to agreements, to be able to share things, share access to resources in a way that everybody feels is fair.
I hope someone out there just took all of that down, because I didn't. That's a tall order, but it sounds so beautiful and delectable. So the next one, we'll keep it short and sweet. If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be and why? I'm sorry to throw these at you.
Well, I think it's definitely got to be an oak tree, because they grow slowly and they become the biggest tree in the forest. And they take many years to develop, but they're the ones that last for a long time.
Yes, we always give that example of sitting under a solid oak tree. Or I grew up listening to my father saying, "Be like the oak tree," or in India we say, "Be like the mango tree," so that you distribute mangoes unconditionally, no matter who's eating them. So the next one, Mark, for you, what would you want to be remembered for?
Well, it's really all about trying to be able to making a contribution to creating a society where people are beginning to work together to meet the challenges of our times, which are, economic, they're social, and they're environmental. So making a significant contribution to meeting those challenges is really what, if I'm going to be remembered for anything, that's the only thing that's worth being remembered for, I think.
Yes. It's always like, what do you want written on your tombstone? I mean, a lot of times, people write obituaries, or, and it might be a dismal, but it's a practical aspect of life. And I think sometimes you've got to take life and the bull by its horns. And it's really nice. Who will cry when you're gone? Or, what do you want to be remembered? These are great conversations to have with ourselves. So the last question for you, Mark, what brings you joy and a smile on your lips? What's the easiest thing that makes you joyful?
Well, I mean, I think the answer that springs to mind most is my grandson.
Oh, how old is he? How old is he?
Nearly 2.5.
He brings you joy. And what is he called? What's his name?
Huey.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Loads and loads of blessings to him. And thank you, Mark. That was it. I mean, you sailed through it. How does that feel?
Oh, it's always nice to, first of all, it's always nice. It's always a bit of a boost to your own sense of self-esteem to be able to get people to listen to what you have to say. But really, I think the challenge is to find ways of feeling good and having a positive influence. So that's the greatest reward.
Yes, and Mark, it's all about being courageous, being vulnerable. And that's why I always introduce rapid fire questions, because it gives you a chance. We go through life sometimes where, everyone's got a front, how are we going to be judged, etc., etc. And when we do these spontaneous interchanges, what I believe and I see is this beautiful unfolding of a very vulnerable spot that you feel safe enough to share with all the audience. So thank you so much, Mark, for being just authentic and saying it as it is. I would like to close this episode with a wish for all our listeners. And the quote that came up for me today is, life is a preparation for the future. And the best preparation for the future is to live as if there was none. And I think that encapsulates what we're trying to say here. Join me, Mark, to say bye to our global audience.
Bye-bye, and lovely to meet you all. And go forward. Be courageous. Do some exciting things that are, in the end, intended to make a better world. And we'll do it. We'll get there. We'll
do it together in a bigger collective fashion to contribute as conscious, universal contributors. Thank you, Mark, once again, and bye-bye, everyone. And we will see you soon in the next episode coming up, which will be the 18th one. Bye for now.